Well, this was the moment that changed one young student's life and set off a controversy nationwide. A state high school track meet that brought a national issue close to home. In May, East Valley High School's Veronica Garcia became the first known transgender athlete to win a Washington State championship when she won the 2A girls 400-meter race in Tacoma. Since then, several school districts have called for the WIAA to reconsider its policies on transgender athletes in sports. We've covered this story extensively, but there's one voice we haven't heard until now. Marissa Rio met with Garcia to hear her perspective on an issue that's dividing the nation.
Throughout this whole controversy, we've heard from many voices. Parents, school officials, and biologically born female athletes have chimed in to raise their concerns over transgender athlete participation in school sports. The WIAA has heard those concerns and is now considering changing its policy. The one voice we have yet to hear from regarding these proposals is from one of the teenagers directly impacted by these decisions. When I asked Veronica Garcia if she'd like to meet with me to share her perspective, she said she'd be flattered to lend her voice.
I feel like a fire engine with lights and sirens on because it's like I'm just trying to compete.
That's how Veronica Garcia feels when her feet hit the track. Competing is her sense of belonging, but at only 17 years old, her identity has put her at the center of controversy. Veronica is transgender and joined the East Valley High School girls team in 2023.
I felt like it was right, I guess, because realistically, if I'm gonna start, living my life as a woman, it would make more sense to compete on the women's team, but also for my own safety if I remained on the boys' team.
But it didn't take long for people to disagree.
They can do all these things, yet what they want to instead do is target children, like literal children. It's like, why do grown adults think it's okay to harass a child, let alone a transgender child? Why would you ever do that?
When Veronica won state earlier this year, she wasn't celebrated with cheers.
When I was on the podium, I did hear some booing, mostly silence.
That critical response still reverberates today.
As much as I maybe don't like to admit it, but I very frequently, occasionally search up, on my phone, Washington State transgender athlete, and then, it gives me articles, and so I've seen pretty much the entire discourse starts off with Linden, then Meade, and then, Colville, all these other school districts wanting the WIAA to change their policy.
The WIAA's current policy reads all students should have the opportunity to participate in WIAA athletics and/or activities in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity, meaning if the student identifies as a girl, they can compete with the girls. People in the community have gathered to raise concerns over how this could be considered fair competition. Some have even raised safety concerns, but Veronica says it would be unsafe to force transgender female athletes to compete with the boys.
That could also technically lead to injury at the same time, but at the same time it could also lead to certain situations such as the male athletes getting touchy with the transgender female athlete, which could obviously cause, a whole host of problems.
While Veronica acknowledges that this isn't always the case, it's still a concern. After hearing what the community has had to say, the WIAA is now proposing to limit girls' sports to only students assigned female at birth.
It's just segregation. It's discriminatory.
Veronica also brought up the small amount of transgender youth that make up high school sports. Since there is no requirement to disclose whether or not a student is transgender, it's hard to verify how many there are. But in a study done by the CDC, it found that just over 3% of U.S. high school students identify as transgender. Research done by the Trevor Project, a nonprofit that advocates for LGBTQ+ youth, found that only 17% of youth who identify as transgender and non-binary participate in sports.
Already transgender youth are feeling unwelcome in sports. The point of high school teams to feel like you belong to something, and stuff like this is going to really negatively impact the mental health of transgender people.
The WIAA is also suggesting an open division in which all students can participate.
Realistically, who is willingly wanting to join an open division? Most are not willing to do that, so that could lead to literally just no one joining the open division, just because it's like people are like, why should I join this?
Veronica says in her opinion, the WIAA should instead consider instituting a hormone requirement, similar to the NCAA. But it's now a waiting game to see how the WIAA will proceed. So as Veronica stares out onto a track field, she's left to wonder if other students, like herself, will be left out in the cold in years to come. The WIAA will discuss and finalize these proposed amendments during its virtual Winter Coalition on January 27th. Veronica says these amendments can cause irreparable harm and asks the WIAA to consider this when making its decision. In studio, Marissa Rio, 4 News Now.